Shmot says as follows: "Velisha benidat tumatach lo tikrav legalot ervatach." There's a prohibition from coming close to a woman during the menstruation period. What does it mean, coming close? It does not only mean having relationships. Lo tikrav also includes any other form of affection, especially a hug, a kiss, or touching. All of that is included in the prohibition lo tikrav. Obviously, this also would apply to single women who are still considered midot until their first tevilah. So tonight we'll be covering actually one of the most important parts of Dinei Taharat HaMishpacha, the family purity laws, that applies to both men and women. They both need to be aware of these. This is probably the one area that both husband and wife, Hatan and Kala, need to learn very well. If there's anything you need to learn very well, this is these halachot. So whoever was not here, he came just on time. The past halachot are also important, but many of them apply to the woman. These, everybody has to be aware of them at all times. And I translated it. It may not be clear. I'll go over them. There are 12 areas in Taharat HaMishpacha that apply to the harchakot, to the various halachot that involve separation during the time that a woman is nidah, during the 12 days. These harchakot, by the way, apply from the time she becomes nidah until the moment she goes to the tevilah. She stops seeing blood. It's there all the time. These halachot apply. And I want to emphasize again that there are very few compromises in this area. So it's safe to pay attention because they apply for a good number of years while a woman has her mahzor, she has this period. So let's begin with the first area. The first area is hakalat rosh. Well, hakalat rosh is that there are various ways a husband and wife can show affection to each other. One can be b'dibur, one can be b'maaseh, and one can be b'itnahagut. Dibur means in the way they talk to each other, these signs of affection. B'maaseh, certain deeds, certain things that they perform for each other regularly, on a regular basis, they can show affection. And by itnahagut, in the certain types of behaviors that they have and they do that can show or demonstrate affection. So all these 12 cover these particular areas. Hakalat rosh, the first one, has to do with showing affection outwardly in very superficial ways. For example, the best example would be saying certain words or saying certain things that you would ordinarily say during that time of the month. You have to hold yourself back. It does not mean you can't buy her flowers for Shabbat. It does not mean you can't buy her a gift on her birthday. That a husband is always encouraged to do. You want to reinforce it. You want to keep strong. Right? It's like your garden. You want to irrigate it. You want to fertilize it. You want to take care of it. If you don't, it's going to dry up. And you can't rely always on your gardener. Especially in this case, you can't rely on somebody else doing it for you. You have to do it yourself. You have to make sure she's happy. And by the way, that applies to the woman too. She has to make sure that her husband is happy. So certain things have to continue even during this period, believe it or not. You may hear now many halachot. You may say, oh, it's time to stay away. It's time to keep off. No, on the contrary, during this time of mitzvah v'chovah, obligation to reinforce and to re-emphasize conversation, communication here too. Because there's so much distance to a certain degree, you have to introduce it in some other way, in a creative way, where it does not interfere with the halakha. Nevertheless, it is still there in a meaningful way. We'll talk a little bit more about it later. Okay, examples of affection, or things that lead to affection. It doesn't have to be an affection act, but it could lead to playing games. I know some husband and wife play tennis. Some say that may not be a big problem because they don't really have direct contact. It's all indirect contact. So it's like ping pong is. Nevertheless, it's best to avoid any games together when you're by yourself because it could lead. It's one of those things that could lead to other affection. So that would be in the category of hakalat rosh. Another one that I don't think applies to any one of you here is that the husband should not light his wife's cigarette. Or the other way around, she should not light his cigarette. Or a candle, he should not light her candle. These are acts of affection, or they bring us too close to each other. Maybe too close, and that is why these things are discouraged, all in the category of hakalat rosh, or signs of affection. Another example that I have here in the list is smelling her perfume directly from her. What are you wearing? What do you put on? Let me smell it. You know? Obviously, if a bottle is open, a new bottle is bought, you can smell it. But directly from her clothing, from her, that is not permissible. It's another sign of affection. Or it could lead the man to have all sorts of thoughts and ideas which are prohibited during this time. What about singing? What would you say? Is a woman allowed to sing in front of her husband? No, a woman is not allowed to sing in front of other men. Kol be'isha irva. So you shouldn't listen live, especially, to a woman singing. The rabbis speak about it because the voice of a woman singing, it causes all sorts of thoughts. It's brought down, the rabbis bring it down. Yeah, of course. It's all derived from the Torah, that there are certain things that are considered erva. Erva, all those areas in a woman that tend to be covered. If they are uncovered, they are considered an erva. You're not allowed to look at it. So the kol, or the se'ar, the hair too, for a married woman is considered an erva. A married woman cannot go with her hair uncovered. It also brings about certain thoughts. And one cannot play in front of uncovered hair. I agree with you. Some of those wigs look better than the hair, and it's a problem. A lot of rabbis, therefore, are against the natural looking, especially if they look like it's always best to cover with a scarf or with whatever, however they call them. I still don't know what it's called till today, but whatever it is, unless the wig is obviously a wig, a head covering would be better. All right, but so singing may be permissible for the husband to hear her, but not dancing. Besides dancing, not during this time of the. Again, these are acts of affection, and they are at least, at the bare minimum, discouraged during this time. All right, next one, and that is actually the one that's perhaps the most common one that you will encounter during those 12 days, is physical contact. And I'm not talking about here relationships, because that is an obvious. Yachasim, marital relationships, is asur min Torah, karet. That is no. But there's something which at least midrabanan, some say midoraita, but at least midrabanan is asur, is prohibited, because it may lead to that which is forbidden in the Torah. And when I say it may lead to, it has led to. From experience, other rabbis have attested. That is why they've given this advice. They've made this harchakot. In other words, maintaining this distance is very important, because it can easily happen. So the second category is called physical contact. Negi'ah ve'hoshata. Negi'ah means actually touching, hoshata means serving or giving something over. There's a difference between the two. While serving, I'll talk about later, but giving something over, even though you're physically not touching your wife, if you hand something over to her, that's called hoshata. That is forbidden. In other words, during these 12 days, or 11 days for those who keep 11 days, it is asur to touch, physically touch her anywhere in her body, and touching includes touching her clothes, even though you're not touching her skin, her body. Touching her shirt is also asur, or handing something over. But in handing something over, there's all sorts of perhaps exceptions, or depending on the circumstances and so forth. Let's say you want to hand over a baby. What do you do? So normally you can't hand anything over. If you need to hand something over, what do? You put it down. Put it down on the table, put it down on the chair. But you may not be able to put down a baby down on the chair, on the table. So if there's a bed, that's the way to do it, right? Let's say your wife is nursing. Can you please put him back in his crib now? I'm finished. She puts him down on the bed, and the husband picks up the baby and takes him to the crib. And he's a nice husband, right? Helping out his wife. It's not asur if the baby is already old enough that he goes himself to the father. If he wants the father to. Then it's okay. If he stretches out his arms, his father can grab him. But if the baby is a young infant, doesn't move on his own, to be transferred from a husband to wife, or the other way around, is asur. Unless you have no choice. Of course, if you're in a situation where there's no place to put him down, then of course you do it, and you're extremely careful that you don't touch. That's the main idea over here, that you don't come to physically touching each other. So there's no choice. Obviously you can do it, but you have to be careful. What would be a typical example where it's too difficult is a carriage. Baby carriage, stroller, especially in Israel where they have chedra madregot, you have staircase, you need help to bring it down, You could help your wife to bring down the stroller. The reason for that is because it's something very, very heavy, and it's something very large. So we're not afraid that you're going to come touch her. Each one is pulling at another end. So if that's the only way to accomplish that, that would be a permissible example, that they can do something together. But otherwise, they can't push something together, they can't pick up something together like moving a chair. They can't do these things together. Even though they're not touching, there is physical contact. Either it's negiah or it's hoshata, handing something over, carrying something together, pushing something together. All of this is asur during the 12 days. But there are circumstances where it may be mutar, and I'm only giving you a few. If you think of something, ask me. No, even though it's a long thing, because it can be done by her by herself, it's not physically difficult to do, she should do it on her own, even if it's long. There's no intent for that. But if it's difficult, it's heavy, like the stroller, down the staircase, that would be mutar. There's no other way. So that isur, or physical contact, includes both negiah and hoshata, and one has to be very careful. Now, this area is a very important area for other reasons too. it can become very obvious that the woman is a nidah. So you also have to be careful that you don't make it obvious that your wife is a nidah. Not to other people and not to your own children. This is a very important area in Taharat HaMishpacha. Never make it obvious to anybody. Nobody should ever know except for you and your wife when she's going to the mikveh. Nobody in the world, nobody should ever know. It's not sanua, it's not a good thing. Nobody, I don't care who it is, should not know. So how do you do it? If somebody asks, Mommy, where are you going? You have to be very creative. I have a meeting. If she has a meeting, it's not a lie. She has a meeting with the mikveh lady. The mikveh lady is going to check her out. You have to have all these explanations in your mind. It's okay. You have to be ready for these questions and they will come up. Somebody calls you, where were you? I had to step out for a moment. That was a long moment. So what? Right? You have to be prepared. Don't lie, of course. You don't want to lie. Say something which is proper and does not give away, where you were. So the same applies to Nigiyah and Hoshata. Nigiyah and Hoshata is a little more tricky. They might be able to sense something. When will they sense? If they see that throughout the whole month, the husband kisses his wife all the time, and all of a sudden for 12 days there's no contact. That is why, don't be surprised, but amongst the very religious and observant, they don't show intimate behavior openly at all times in front of their kids. Even though it's a beautiful thing to show respect, to give affection to one's wife and to one's husband, in the open, when I say in the open, I mean in one's home in front of kids or other people, it's not a good idea. Only because you run into this problem of, what happened now? Right? So of course, occasionally, fine, you come home, say a kind word, you show some warmth and affection, but to do it regularly and a lot, and all of a sudden to hold back, people are going to ask what happened. So that is why, amongst those who are observant, this is not done very openly. When the kids are not looking, there's a lot of opportunities to show affection. But you don't have to do it all the time in front of them and all of a sudden hold back. Sooner or later they'll ask, especially if they're a little older, what's going on now? Are they upset at each other? Right? But you don't want to make it obvious. The same thing with Hoshata, giving over things. You have to be smart. You don't just throw it, I'm sorry, I can't give it to you. You don't make it too obvious. You put it down, you don't show it. And this very much applies in Kiddush on Friday night especially. Or even Saturday morning. Kiddush. Husband, the father gives over the cup of wine. He always would give it directly to his wife. He can't do it now. He has to put it down next to her plate. Or the way I do it is I pour everybody. They don't drink from my cup. I pour everybody, and I give it to my kids to give everybody. So everybody eventually gets. So it's not obvious. And I do so the whole time. Not only during that time, but during the whole time. So there's no difference. Well, yeah, of course, she gets first. But I don't give it to her directly. I ask one of my kids, please give it to mommy. And I do that all the time. All the time, not just during that time. Please give mommy gets first. Of course. That means, So it depends on the sitting arrangement. She's very close to you. Then you put it down next to her. You don't give it to her in her hand. Right. If she sits next to you, then you just put it down next to her. But if she doesn't sit down next to you, she likes serving, if she likes sitting close to the kitchen, you just give it to one of the children. And if you do that all the time, then you don't have that problem. Yeah. No, he doesn't always give it traditionally directly to his kala. He can always give it to the kala's mother, to the rabbi. If she's happening to be close to him, she's very close, standing very close to him, then he would give it to her directly. It's mutar. But if you give it to somebody else, give it to her, there's no problem. Especially when you talk about nafukat nidah, that's what you would have to. Okay, so that is one idea. What happens if one of the two forget? They handed something to someone. The husband handed something to his wife. The wife handed it to her husband. They both forgot. That happens. It could happen. So you don't want to make it too obvious. I'm sorry, I need that, or I can't do it. Especially if there's other people around. There's nobody around. You just remind the person, right? But if there are other people around, what do you do? What do you do if you're in public in somebody else's house? It becomes very tricky. You have to be very careful. So do you have any suggestions, Harry? Right, there's a certain degree of preventing embarrassment here, nekvod habriyot, that you don't embarrass someone, but you still can't do it. So what do? You do it with a disappointed face. In other words, you show that you're disappointed, not at her, of course, at yourself, that you have to go through this. In other words, that the word for it is not disappointed. You show a reluctance. You have to be reluctant to do it. You show reluctancy, and you try to do it beshinui. In other words, not directly touching it. In other words, like, make it fall into your hand, or make it fall into her hand, or let her take it from your hand instead of you putting it into her. No, that happened. She forgot. Or if it's in public, in somebody else's house, and there's no other way to do it, then you can do it the shinui, some sort of shinui. In other words, like throwing it into her hand. You can not show that you're throwing it, here, catch, right? You do it, in a way that it drops into her hand. But you don't put it directly. Worst comes to worst, let her grab it from your hand, but you don't put it directly. That would be better if she takes it, or if you take it, not that one puts it into the other person's hand, unless he or she throws it in. So if you're in a public place and you have no choice, you can't do it too discreet, you do something like that with shinu or some other way that you recognize, and you do it with a reluctant face. In other words, you do it reluctant, like you're aware of the mistake, or you're aware of the situation. But never do you touch physically. That's asur mamad. This area, both men and women have to be very diligent. It applies to both. What? For a man, it's very important. You're right. For a man, some things here are very important because he can get into trouble much easier than a woman, because he has sometimes thoughts that the woman may not have. And that is why certain things are prohibited for the man to do, and some things are prohibited for the woman to do. We'll talk about it later. For example, if one of them is sick, it makes a big difference if the man is sick or if the woman is surprised, but that's the fact. So what do you do? But this is very important to keep in mind, because you could easily make a mistake. And if that happens, of course, we're talking about negiah or shata, you show that you're reluctant, and you're careful next time that it doesn't happen. By the way, I might as well mention it now, because mistakes can happen, because people can forget, that is why there is a custom. Not everybody is very observant of this custom, very strongly, but nevertheless it's a good custom that a woman during the time that she's a nidah should make it obvious to her husband by wearing special clothing or different clothing. Just to remind them, some people wear some jewelry, a piece of jewelry that she only wears during that time. Everybody should come up with their own idea. This is not an obligation. This is a custom that many people have, just to further remind each other of the time that they cannot be with each other. Now, since I mentioned that, I might as well mention something else. There are some opinions who hold she should not wear her best clothes during that time. Her fanciest and the most beautiful, because that is megareh, that can entice the husband. Okay, this is interesting, this is nice, this smells good, this is nice, beautiful. So she should be careful not to put on her best. However, since she might not do that, she may not put on her best clothing, she should be careful nevertheless to put on her makeup, to put on her regular jewelry. Because a woman has to be very careful, not to become ugly in the face of her husband. That is very serious, very dangerous. So the rabbis were very sensitive to this, that during this time, when there is a certain amount of distance, a woman or the man might take it too far. No. Too strict is also no good. That creates a rift, it creates too much distance, and if it's the woman who's not taking care of herself during these 12 days, the husband might say, this is what you look like. This is what you do. So therefore she should be careful to dress up, makeup, I'm talking about makeup and jewelry, just as much as during the rest of the month. Yeah. Right, simcha is something else. I'm talking about in the house. So simcha for wedding, of course, she wears whatever she regularly would wear. Okay, another idea that is included in this category of negiah or shata is, let's say, the baby in the mother's hand. The father should not go over and kiss the baby while he is in the mother's hand. It's not asur, but it's an arhaka, to just keep them apart so they should not come to touch, and not come to have any thoughts that are prohibited. Yes, of course you can cook. What's wrong with cooking? There's a lot of people who have all sorts of ideas, superstitions. The only thing that is brought down in the Kabbalah, in the Halacha, is for a woman to be careful not to go to the Bet Kevarot, to a cemetery, during the time that she's a nidah. That, yes, okay, when there is Tum'ah. No, that's already not superstition. There are some that were careful not to go to a Bet Knesset during the time, at least during the time that she has blood. Go to a funeral for sure, you have to be very careful. That could be a little sensitive. But perhaps I'll talk about this another time, what the problem is. But this is already not superstition, this is already brought down. Huh? No, any woman comes down. That is why I think a lot of single girls don't go to cemeteries. But it's not a sur. It's not prohibited. It can be, exactly. Some women is something else, it's sur, but some don't go. I heard about that, yeah. Right, yours said they won't go, they could go. Yeah, they can go, it's not a sur, but there are some that are careful not to go during that time. So I'm just pointing out that this thing is superstitious. This isn't. Yeah, go ahead. Some are careful with that too. That if she's very bloody, that she should not touch the Torah. Exactly. Makes no difference. It's just out of respect. This is more out of respect for the Torah. It's something which has kedusha, not to touch it. Some don't even go and touch the Kotel HaMaravi, the western wall. That time also. For the same reason. It's not asur. passing over things, as much as possible, one should be careful not to throw it either. Next one. Akhila al-shulchan echad. Eating on the same table. This is never a problem when you have many kids. When you have many kids, husband and wife are at the table, the kids are at the table, eating all at the table, this is not a problem. It's only a problem when you are by yourself. When a husband and wife are single, are recently married, they have no kids, or they're honeymooning, or they're by themselves, and she's a nidah, then they can eat, of course, at the same table, but there's a certain amount of harhaka, the same amount of harhaka, of distance, that applies to basar and halal. Remember we spoke about it, meat and dairy? One wants to have a steak sandwich and one wants to have lasagna on the same table. Each child wants to have something else. And this is basar and this is halal on the same table. Could they? Yes. As long as there's some heker. Heker number one, heker means something that will remind them that they should not come to share their food. One type of heker is to put something in the middle of the table between the two, something which is regularly not there. So if you have a plant that's always there, that's not a heker. It would have to be something that's usually not there. That's a typical heker. Or each one eating on a separate type of placemat. Sitting not in your regular seat. They have regular seats, they change. To make some heker, that would be sufficient if they want to sit at the same thing. Obviously, if there's other people, if there's guests, whether it's guests or they're eating somewhere else, there's no problem. It's only when they are by themselves and they may come close, to touching or to sharing food in the sewer. Okay, the next halakha is achilat shilayim shel ishto. This is very relevant. Your wife didn't finish her food. She didn't finish her plate. Started eating, she didn't finish her plate. A husband cannot eat the leftovers of his wife. Leftovers, whether it's a drink or whether it's food, he cannot have. This is halakha that could be very relevant, that it could happen. He's not in the mood to finish, and he's still hungry. The man is still hungry, right? He cannot have her food. He began eating from it. Now, obviously, if it's she took several portions and she didn't intend to eat all of it, if the rest is clean, he can have what's clean, but she didn't finish. Only from that she began eating. All of this has to do with hibah. It brings affection to his thought, to his wife. During this time, the rabbis said that there has to be distance, and this is one of those things that would break the distance and close. So the husband would not be able to eat the leftover food from his wife. There's an exception to that. She's not around. She left the house, she left the room, she's gone, she's not looking. Right? Then that would be okay. By the way, she could eat from only the other way around. He cannot eat. Another exception to this rule would be that after she finished eating from it, somebody else ate from it. And now it's the husband's turn. Then it's okay. It didn't come directly from his wife. Somebody else had it already. Or she can eat from his food. Left over, there's no problem. What? No. Once she ate from it. That is why it's a suit to eat from one big, if you have a big platter where everybody sticks their hand and eats from it, you cannot have that the husband and the wife are eating from the same platter. Unless together, each one pours himself. That's okay. The husband can pour himself, the wife can pour herself in the same bowl, in the same pot. But if it's a plate where each one actually eats from directly, like a dip, tahina, they shouldn't dip from the same tahina, but they're eating directly from it. Another exception to this rule is, let's say, that food that was in that plate was put into another kli, into another cup, into another plate, then it would be permissible as well. Another exception would be that the husband is not aware that this is his wife's food. If he comes to the kitchen, and he doesn't ask, if he's leftovers, he eats. That's okay too. As long as he does not know that it's from his wife, it's fine. Another exception would be that she just tasted. She wants to see if it's okay, if it's missing salt or pepper. She's the cook. She didn't really eat from this. That would be permissible too. What if she slices a piece of bread? The loaf is not asur. Slicing is not like you're eating from it directly mamash. You're allowed to slice yourself. Then the husband can take for himself in that same loaf of bread. That would be permissible. By the way, the Sephardim are more mahmirim than Ashkenazim in one important area. That is, drank from a cup. Many Sephardim are mahmir that the husband needs to rinse the cup. That's an extra humrah. Okay, I think we can go to the next halakha. And that is yeshiva u'shchiva al mitata. This is also a very important halakha. That a husband cannot sit or sleep, of course, lie down on his wife's bed, even if she's not in the room. Laying down or sitting on her bed while she's in nidah is asur, because this leads to all sorts of thoughts, prohibited thoughts. She can sit down on his bed, but she cannot lie down, unless of course he's not there. To lay down, that's fine. But she can sit down, but she's not allowed to lie down on his bed in front of him, especially. But him on her bed is always a surah. There's only one exception, perhaps. That is, she's gone for a long time. She went on a big trip. She's going to be away for a while. And some say that it's okay, it's permissible. Okay, so you leave the Nesiyot. During this time, during these 12 days, it is not encouraged to go on pleasure trips, I call it. Pleasure trips meaning that you're only going by yourself. It's unclean. What are you going to do? So even though you're having time for yourself, which is a good and healthy thing to do, it should be discouraged during this time. Try to plan it during some other time when she's clean. Only because you're by yourself. Which leads to the other point of what do you do if you're in a bus together and sitting on the same bench. In this area of sitting together, Ashkenazim are more mahmir than Sephardim, especially if it's a moving safsal. How do you call it in English? The swings. You don't sit on the same swing, especially if the swing is moving back and forth. It's very affectionate thing to do. You sit close on the same swing, it's moving, each one is close to the other. That is something which is discouraged. And Ashkenazim are more mahmir, but even Sephardim have accepted upon themselves certain chumrot today in many communities, including this one. So what do you do if you're in a bus and you're very close to each other? You have to be very careful not to touch. But you're sitting, right? You'd rather sit next to your wife than next to another woman. I mean, that's the right thing to do, is to sit if you can, unless it's easier for you to sit somewhere else. Then she should sit closer to the window, and the husband should sit closer to the aisle, so in case there's a turn, the bus turns around, you don't fall on her. Yes, that's, I'm telling you this from experience. What some people do is that they put the purse or something in between them. This is additional chumrot. It's not an obligation, but it's just to avoid that they shouldn't come to touch each other. Right? This is a serious area. People need to take it seriously. The touching is a sur. And a sofa at home is a little bit more lenient because if one part moves, the other part doesn't really feel it. So there's no really sur to sit on the same sofa. It's okay, right? But in a bus, in a situation, or in a swing, it's a little bit closer and it's moving, then you have to be much more careful. What? If there's other people in the car, there's no problem, right? The people in between you, you should, be careful not to touch, not to be too close. That's the main idea. Okay, I think we can go on to the next one. Also, very, very important area that people are somehow, for some reason, not too knowledgeable about. You cannot sleep in the same bed during that time. Therefore, when you're first shopping for furniture, guess what? You cannot buy a king-size bed or a queen-size bed, which is, typical in this country. This is not a Jewish type of bed. Now, there are exceptions. Somebody suggested, well, what if one sleeps in another room during that time of the month? I've heard that in Kurdistan, maybe. Right? What? In Kurdistan. Yeah. Some people don't care. I think it's a lack of sensitivity. What do you mean? Somebody should sleep in another room? But some people, I guess, don't mind. Okay. I think I know when this happens a lot, especially if one snores. But they don't mind that anyway. Okay, I might as well go to another room. I have a good excuse now. Right, exactly. So that's another reason why I don't like it, But sometimes it's not so obvious. Maybe you have, maybe you're with the kids, or maybe you're just laying down. Obviously, we're getting back to the same point I said before. You have to make it not too obvious. But let me re-emphasize this point. In most Jewish homes that know about these halachot well, you will not find a queen or king-size bed. Because what do you do during the rest of the time? Now, during the time that they are together, that they are allowed to be together, there are various customs. People do different things. So you buy queen-size beds. So now that you bought queen-size beds, how close should they be to each other? Well, during the time that husband and wife are allowed to be together, the beds can be together. Okay? So you bring them close to each other. What happens during the time that she's nida? The kids are all of a sudden going to see that the beds are apart. So what do people do to not make it obvious? They do several things. Either they always keep them apart during the day, and at night they bring them close if they want to. They don't have to bring them close, but depending on how, that's really up to them. But during the day it's always apart. That's one idea. The other idea is that, let me see if I remember. What I think other people do is that they always have them close to each other, and at night they separate them during that time. Something like that. People do different things just to not make it too obvious for the kids, exactly. It's always open or it's always closed, and during the necessary time, they can bring it together if they choose to bring it together. So when it's permissible, you can bring them together. When it's not permissible, by the way, there has to be a certain distance between the two beds. So how much distance? Enough that they shouldn't be able to stretch out their hands and touch. That's the distance. Now, the backboards can be attached. In other words, sometimes some people have furniture where it's one big backboard, one piece of wood, and the beds are attached to it. That's okay if it's one big backboard, as long as there's some distance between the two. If you have one big bed, what are you going to do during that time? It's too difficult. I mean, even if it's a big bed and each one is on his own corner, there's no heter for it. It's not permissible. So if you're stuck in a hotel and that's the only bed they have, one of you is going to sleep on the floor. Yeah, or on the couch, or you're going to have to get a rollaway. And this is what happens during the first night of Chatan V'Kala. When they go to a hotel, that's what they had. After they're finished, each one has to be in a separate bed, or a rollaway. Or if there's twin-size bed, then there's no problem. If you have twin-size bed, that's the easiest way to go about it, at all times. If you want to bring them close, bring them close. If not, alright. Modesty. Husband is allowed to look at his wife. Not only is he allowed to look, he should look at his wife, but he's allowed to look even if she's not dressed modestly. Except during the time that she's a nidah, he has to be more careful what he sees. That which he ordinarily would be able to see, that to him would be mutar, and for other men would be asur. During the time that she's a nidah, he should be careful not to look at her. I mean, she can get undressed if she wants in the room, but he should not look at her. He could be there. She should turn away. He has to be extra careful during that time, not to see her private, those areas that are private, that she usually has covered up. So there's more modesty here, and this is also an additional harchaka that he shouldn't come to any thoughts or any ideas. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay, I think we can go to the next one. Mezigat kos v'agashat okel. In the olden days, it was customary to dilute the wine. The wine was very strong, and they diluted it with water. Mezigat kos therefore meant that the woman, one of the things that she would do for her husband, as a sign of affection, and that she cared, she would not only cook for him, she would actually serve him. She would not only serve him, she would actually dilute his wine for him in front of him. She would bring over the wine, she would pour the water. This was a maaseh of chibah, of affection. It was a very affectionate maaseh, more than many other things. This is a sur during that time of the month, for her to serve him directly the wine, and unless she puts it down. Some say that she could put down the wine, the cup of wine, not to pour it into. Some say she can pour it, but not serve it. We do neither of the two. In other words, the woman should not pour him, nor should she put down the cup of wine next to him during this time. Yes, now I'm talking about kos yain right now, only one. Yeah, the regular food is not a problem, but she should not give it to him mamash, into his hand. She serve like she serves everybody on the table. She can serve him too. So the main food over here is mezigat kos. It's wine or anything which is affectionate. Some say she should not give him his favorite food. But we don't have that chumrah. On the contrary, she should treat him nicely and he should treat her nicely. The only prohibition was in the mezigat kos because that was much more affectionate. The same thing, he should not serve her either. That is why during Kiddush, Friday night or Shabbat, he should not pour her directly. Unless he pours it into a cup and then somebody else gives it to her. Let's say she has to do it, there's nobody else to serve him and she's in front of him in the same room. She should do it, there's something she should do with the shinui. She usually does it with her right hand, she's allowed to do it with her left hand. In other words, there should be a shinui. If there's a shinui, something that's done differently, then it's not so obvious, then that would be permissible. Or if it's not in front of him, she does it in one room and he's in another room, that's okay. Okay, the next one, Asa'at Mitah, making the beds. We're not talking about just making the beds every morning, woman wakes up in the morning, she makes all the beds. That's okay. But making his bed, specifically, his bed, for him, in front of him, is a sur. And when we're talking about making the bed, we're talking about the linen, the sheets, straightening it out. We're not talking about changing the pillow covers. That's hard work, right? Hard work is permissible, right? We're talking about just straightening things out, making it look nice, making it look clean. In front of him, it's a sur during the time she's nidah. If it's only for him. It's another maaseh of chibah, to show she cares for him, she does it for him. During that time, it would be a sur to do so. Yetzikat mayim is the next one. That is pouring of water or washing the other's hands, feet, or face. Whenever I go through this halakha, I wonder how, once upon a time, women did so much for their husbands. They actually washed his feet and his hands and his face.
Harry, would you want something like that? No? She treats you nicely anyway, huh? Huh? Yeah. Anyway, I remember when I was going out, when I was dating, they told me that Sephardi girls are so good and dedicated that they even put the slippers next to their husband's bed. When he wakes up, he has them next to him. And I don't know how true it is today in the 21st century, but I can surely attest that with my wife at least, many of those things are very true. Some women are very dedicated, and as you said, it's a blessing. If you get something like that, you did win the lottery. But it also works the other way around. There are some men who are very devoted, very dedicated. They wash the dishes. They take over. And my father said that when the kids were growing up, he would stay up late at night. When the kids are crying, the babies are nursing, they wake up, they go back to sleep, and you can't get too much sleep. So my father told my mother, you had a lot of work for 9 months. Now I'll take over for the next 9. In other words, during the time that they're nursing and they need help, you get your sleep, you get your rest, and I'll take over. Even though it was very hard, they were both working, and it's not easy, but they both have to share the burden. That's what makes a loving relationship, when each one does not feel he has a greater burden. It's shared. So Yitzikat Hamayim means pouring water. During that time, obviously the woman cannot wash or help her husband with pouring water over him, over his hands, washing him up. Obviously this cannot be done. This is also chibah. It shows affection. It shows that she cares for him, and this is very nice, but not during this time. But she's allowed to bring in mayim rishonim and mayim acharonim. She wants to bring to the table the water, so he can pour himself, wash his hands. Like on Pesach night. During the Pesach night, in the first Seder, we have a custom that the husband, the father, doesn't get up from the seat. He's a king. They bring in the water. Let him pour himself by the table. She's allowed to bring the water. And there's a lot of kids that can bring it too. That she will be permissible to bring, but she cannot give it to him directly in his hands, obviously. He would put it down and he would wash himself. So therefore she cannot wash him or pour the water on him, in his hands or any other part of his face, his feet, because that is a ma'aseh chibah as well. Okay, the last item is an important item, and that is, what do we do if one of them is sick? We talked about the various archakot, how there's no physical contact, there's some distance, you can't do everything that you regularly do for each other during that time of the month. So what do you do if one is sick? If the husband is sick, it's not as bad as if the woman is sick. Because the woman doing things for her husband has less of a problem than if the man is healthy and he's about to help his wife out. He may have thoughts, he may have ideas, and therefore it's a lot stricter. But we're going to go through both situations. First, about the husband who is sick. The husband is sick, and there are other people in the house that can help out, then because his wife is an idah, she cannot help him out. Even if she's sick. Of course, she should bring him the Tylenol and let him take it himself. She should do whatever she can to help him, but not to touch, not to pick him up. What if there's nobody else to help him? And he needs eye drops. There's nobody else. There's nobody else, and she can do it. She can put on his tefillin if he has a cast. He just can't move himself around. She can help him put on his tefillin. She can help him get up. If there's nobody else in the house. We're not talking about, of course, an emergency situation. And of course, each one can do for each other if there's an emergency situation, right? But even if he's sick, it's not an emergency. She can't help if there's nobody else. But she has to be as careful as possible that she shouldn't do something which is unnecessary or touch him if it's not necessary. If at all possible, if there's any physical contact, she should not touch his body. She should touch in other words, the clothing, as opposed to touching his actual body. But if there's no other way to do it, then it's permissible for her to do it. The other way around, however, it's a lot more complex. If the woman is sick, the man cannot just do anything for his wife. And it becomes a big problem. Even if there's nobody else at home, he cannot do anything for his wife that would involve moving her, touching her, helping her. It's a very difficult situation. He has to hire help. If he doesn't have any kids, he has to hire someone. The best thing is to have a relative come over, her mother, her sister. If they're in some village where there's nobody else, then they have no choice, then he can assist her. But even then, he has to be very careful. And the custom is to use a glove, believe it or not. Gloves, or any other beged, not to touch her directly. So you shouldn't come to touch her physically directly, believe it or not. That's the halakha when a woman is sick. Obviously, if she's in very grave danger, that's a whole different story. I'm not talking about grave danger. Yeah. Now, in the hospital, one has no excuse. There's other doctors and there are nurses. That is why I told you, I believe, last week, when a woman gives birth and she's already has delivered, or she's just about to deliver, and her womb is opening up, there's already blood possibly, he's not allowed to touch her, he's not allowed to hold her hand. Even though she may want that at that time, it's a sur. So if the woman is the one that's sick, it becomes more complicated. Now, what if the husband is a doctor? Even if he's a doctor, he cannot take her pulse. And that's, of course, grave danger. And he needs to see what her pulse is, what medication to give her. That's something else. But if there's no grave danger, he's not allowed to do it. He has to get somebody else to do it, even though he's a doctor. He's a lot stricter when the woman is sick. The husband cannot just do anything for her. Of course, he needs to help her out. She needs to help him out. And whatever they can do to help each other out, to make life easier for the two, bring him a cup of water, bring him the Tylenol, bring him the medicine, move things around. That's fine, but to physically pick them up, move them around, touch them, that of course is clear. There's no other etzah. The best suggestion is to have somebody else in the house assist if it involves physical contact. Yeah, one time. Right. The reason I mention that is because a lot of people, a lot of men, they're excited and they want to go into the delivery room to see the baby being born. And a woman becomes very emotional and excited, and she's in pain perhaps too. And she would very much want some caressing, somebody to hold her hand, especially during the continuous contraction. She's a nidah. At the time she's already giving birth, the womb has opened up, there's blood. Right. Still, the Torah says, lo tikrav, in other words, you cannot get close, and it does not distinguish whether at that moment it's possible for him to have any thoughts or not. Or yes, once she's me'at kenidah, once she receives the nidah, or is gava, or in the case where she has given birth, she has the tumat lidah, she's unclean, and he's not allowed to physically come close to her. In other words, they made certain standards. They made certain siyagim u'gdarim, certain fences. And these fences are meant to stay there, to remain there, not to be broken, unless circumstances warrant an exception. Yeah. Otherwise, you didn't say, well, right now he's not in the mood. Right? Now he's not going to think about it. Now it's in public. There's other people around. No. We needed a two and that's it. But you're right. I don't think at that time he would have any ideas. And nevertheless, nidah is nidah. But there are various situations where if he needs to, even then, he has to do it very carefully. That he doesn't touch her unnecessarily, especially in parts where he's not allowed to touch. Right. No, he can't. And a woman who knows the halachot understands this. She understands that she very much misses it. She would very much want it. But if it's in the hospital, there's a lot of nurses and doctors to help her out. And you just wish her mazal tov, of course. And obviously, if it's an emergency, then there's no issue. There's no question about it. You do almost anything you can. You take your wife to the hospital on Shabbat. You don't call an ambulance. You do it yourself. You drive her yourself. You don't wait, right? Because she's in danger. Giving birth, child is in danger. No. This is only between husband and wife. No. It makes no difference. The only time that would have made a difference is in the time of the Bet HaMikdash, when we had the Dinei Tumah B'Tahara. You cannot enter the Bet HaMikdash. You cannot eat from Kodashim if you were unclean or if you touched somebody that was unclean. So you would stay away from these individuals as well to avoid coming tameh. Today that we don't have these halachot, that we don't have these issues, then you don't have to be concerned about it. But with a husband and a wife, you have the idea of harachaka. You should not be intimately involved. It's not come too close. That is why we have these garim and shegim, these fences that need to be observed for 11 or 12 days. And unless a situation arises where there's no way about it, then there may be an exception, but you have to be careful. You just can't allow yourself to say, okay, now it's permissible. Okay. There's nobody else. No, you have to do it as carefully as possible, but there should be no physical contact. Either doing it through gloves or doing it through some other cloth, not holding her directly. In other words, in such a way that you and her will remember that it's not permissible, but nevertheless, there's nobody else to help out, so you have to do it. Yeah. Then why should you call an ambulance if it's kind of more... But why would you want to call an ambulance? You don't just call an ambulance for any reason too. What I did last time, it was a little bit of blood, but there was no contraction. But because it was a little bit of blood, it's an issue of concern. So I called a taxi, didn't drive myself, because she was considered like a woman who was very sick with health, that you can't use a goy. You can use a goy in Shabbat for certain situations for a choleh. But it wasn't an immediate danger, and it wasn't an immediate birth either. So depending on the situation, either you do it yourself, you can call a goy, or you just wait until there is a real need. And then either you go yourself or you call, depending on
situations. You can go yourself or not. These are important halachot, and we'll talk about it when we cover the Chot Shabbat. After we finish with the series of Taharat HaMishpacha. Okay, next week we'll be doing the Chot Pesach, a quick review of the Chot Pesach, and we'll be off for 2 weeks. Just want to remind you that Sunday B'ezrat Hashem at 8 o'clock or so, we'll have the video presentation here, and if we duplicated enough videos, they'll be handing them out as well. The video of the lecture that I gave on the spices and everything right before Tisha B'Av. It was edited in Israel, and it came out very good, Baruch Hashem. And I hope that those who see it will become stronger during these very uncertain times. That people are very concerned and afraid, do not know what's going to happen tomorrow. And we, of course, are hoping that tonight is the Chodesh Nisan, that this month will be the Chodesh HaGeulah, the month of redemption of Hashem. And we pray and have that in mind in our prayers. Tomorrow there's another lecture here. Yeah, right. The video presentation, right. There are flyers of video. Well, a lot of good things are happening, but there's a need for more action. Sure, of course. Right. I hope so. I just hope people are sincere and they mean it, and they take upon themselves commitment, not just empty words, not just lip service, but they take upon themselves to become better people. Yeah. So what's the idea of fasting? It's to humble one's heart and to bring himself to want to do teshuvah. It's just a medium to show that Hashem that we regret our deeds, that we beseech you to help us out in our time of need. But this hopefully should be a medium, a vehicle to help us do teshuvah shlema, complete teshuvah. Right. By having everybody unite for the same cause, it's a tremendous unity.